TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewbs, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewbs, and this is Dewbs and Kerr. Now, decisive breakthrough. The Windsor Framework is what I refer to, also known as the potential way forward for Northern Ireland. What do you make to it? Have you seen it? As always, though, the devil will be in the detail. And also, get this, King Charles is meeting the President of the European Commission. Why? Many people are furious about that. I've got to say, it is certainly a little bit peculiar, is it not? And benefits. Apparently, there's calls now for something similar to the triple lock to be applied to make sure that everyone can afford their essentials. Isn't this basically a universal basic income in all but name? Where do you stand on it? And I want to speak rubbish to you. Yes, I know it won't be for the first time, but genuinely this time I do indeed want to talk waste. Because right across the country, many of us now have to make an appointment to go to our tip. Do you think that is right? And what about this whole ridiculousness now when it comes to the separation of the rubbish, all in the pursuit of recycling? Is that our job, or should it basically be left to the councils to do more? And get this, apparently now, if you want to succeed at business, you need to study the classics. Really? Is that the answer, the key to success? I want your thoughts on that. But first, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. And the latest news this hour is that the Democratic Unionist Party says significant progress has been made on the Northern Ireland Protocol deal, but they say there are still key issues of concern. The DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, says his party wants to study the details of the agreement first and change parts of it with the government if required. The Prime Minister has described the deal as a decisive breakthrough. It's named the Windsor Framework, and Rishi Sunak says it'll deliver smooth-flowing free trade across the UK, whilst at the same time protecting Northern Ireland's sovereignty.
It's about showing that our union, that has lasted for centuries, can and will endure. And it's about breaking down the barriers between us, setting aside the arguments that for too long have divided us, and remembering that fellow feeling that defines us, this family of nations, this united kingdom.
Well, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the deal strengthens the relationship between the UK and the EU.
The new Windsor Framework respects and protects our respective markets and our respective legitimate interests. And most importantly, it protects the very hard-earned peace gains of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement for the people of Northern Ireland and across the island of Ireland.
Well, Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker told GB News he's proud of what's been achieved.
Really didn't think he'd succeed, and I was wrong, thank goodness. The Prime Minister's pulled a blinder here. He's delivered a deal which restores Northern Ireland's place in the Union on a wide range of areas, restores free trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK market, and deals with the democratic deficit. It's a triumphant achievement.
Now, in other news today, CCTV images have been released of a car used by a gunman who shot an off-duty officer in Omagh. Senior Detective John Caldwell was shot multiple times at a sports complex in County Tyrone last week. Crime Stoppers has offered a reward of up to £20,000 for any information. Detective Chief Inspector Eamon Corrigan says the force is appealing to anyone who may have seen the vehicle in the 2 weeks leading up to the attack.
Our CCTV footage shows the car leaving the sports complex and turning left onto the Killyclogher Road immediately after the shooting. We then know it travelled past the Glendale service station to the Recopla Road, where they abandoned the car and set it on fire.
The energy regulator has reduced the cap on how much suppliers can charge customers, but bills are still expected to rise. Ofgem has announced the cap on the amount households pay for gas and electricity will drop by almost £1,000 from the 1st of April. However, customers are likely to pay 20% more on annual bills, as the government's additional support only partially protects them. That means the average household will most likely pay £500 more a year than they did before. The Labour leader says he wants to bring the UK back to being a rock of economic stability. Sir Keir Starmer used a speech in central London today to set out his economic vision, saying Britain needs certainty but also change in order to achieve that goal. He said his real ambition was growth from the grassroots.
A new model for economic growth, growth from the grassroots, where wealth is created everywhere, by everyone, for everyone. Raise our collective sights beyond the day-to-day, deliver the long-term solutions our country needs. So here, in this document, the mission: secure the highest sustained growth in the G7, a measurable goal.
Well, flags are flying at half-mast today in Westminster following the death of the former House of Commons Speaker, Baroness Betty Boothroyd. She became the first woman to be elected as Speaker in April 1992, staying on in the role until October 2000. Currently, the Speaker is Sir Lindsay Hoyle, and he's called her an inspiring woman and an inspirational politician, describing her as one of a kind. The Baroness has died at the age of 93. Now, the legal age to get married has been raised to 18 to help protect vulnerable children. 16 and 17-year-olds can no longer wed or enter a civil partnership in England or Wales from today, even if they have their parents' consent. The law change means it's now a crime to exploit children by forcing them into an arranged marriage. The Girls Not Brides coalition has called it a huge victory. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Time for Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm engrossed there in all of your emails. So many of you getting in contact with me tonight. I'll remind you of the topics in just a couple of seconds, but keeping me company until 7 o'clock this evening is my Monday favourites, I like to call them. Daniel Moylan, the Tory peer in the House of Lords, and Kevin Craig, a former Labour councillor and the CEO of communications company PLMR. Hello.
Hi, Michelle.
Welcome.
Can I say one thing, Michelle?
Evening, Michelle.
Oh, God, when someone starts a show like this, it always makes me nervous. Go on.
Don't be. I've noticed that on Fridays they seem to get drinks on this show.
Yes, but that's because it's Friday.
OK.
We don't encourage irresponsible drinking on Dewbs & Co. I think once a week is in with, you know, the guidelines of responsible drinking. Okay. If I was to do it 5 nights a week, that might be stretching it a little bit too far.
But you never ask us on Fridays.
Yes, but that's because I like interesting, upbeat, fun people on Friday. I keep my
see.
serious people
I see.
on the Monday.
That'll teach me.
Yes, there you go.
That's us in our box.
Yes. And also, I've just been told in my ear that was a bit harsh. I was only joking,
I know.
you two.
We hear it.
I have a very sensitive director, so I do. Anyway, you guys are saying welcome back. Yes, I have indeed been off for a week. Had a very nice time, so I've missed you all so much. Thought about you often. Especially you two. This
Thank
time
you.
last week, I was sitting there in posh Butlins thinking, oh, gosh, I'm missing Daniel and Kevin tonight. Yeah. So I am. Anyway, you guys have been in touch with me already tonight. Lots of you getting in touch to talk rubbish with me, which I always appreciate, because I want to talk to you about tips. Don't worry, yes, I know there's important things going on in the world. We'll get to them as well. But I also think that waste and rubbish and recycling, it affects all of us, doesn't it? What do you make to you goings on in your council when it comes to getting rid of your rubbish? How many bins do you have these days? Do you have those food bags as well? I mean, what's going on? And do you have to make appointments to get into your tip? Very important conversations. But in addition to that, I also want to ponder with you benefits. Do you think that they should essentially have almost like a triple lock, if you like, protected in that way, so they should always rise with inflation to make sure that everyone in this country can afford the very basics? And of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol, I want to talk to you about that as well. And the classics, how important are they in this day and age, particularly when it comes to perhaps you wanting to succeed in business? Give me your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk is how you reach me on email. Or you can tweet me as well at GBNews. Stuart said, oh, Michelle, I was worried about you then for a minute. He thought my holiday might have changed me. I was just talking to Patrick Christie's in the show before about the changes to James Bond, and I was saying I don't think they go far enough. I personally wouldn't rest until James has become Janine and he's in a wheelchair, perhaps, mixed race at the very least, and all the rest of it. Only then will I truly rest and think that proper changes and progress have been made in this society. What about you? Anyway, let's move on, shall we? The big news of the day, decisive breakthroughs, is what I am talking about. Rishi Sunak's words, not mine. The Windsor framework. This is all about a new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Let's just get straight into it with you, Daniel Moylan. Are you happy with what you've seen today? Of course, the devil will be in the detail, but on the cusp of it where you stand today, what are you?
Well, I'm still suspicious.
Right.
I don't prejudge it because it's just been published before we came on the show and I haven't had a chance to read it. So there may be something there. But if all it's doing is shifting the burden of paperwork away from the ports, away from the actual checks, so it remains a burden on businesses as it leaves their offices, if it's not properly addressing the fact that people in Northern Ireland are subject to foreign laws with no say, which is the antithesis of democracy, and shouldn't be allowed in the 21st century, then it won't be acceptable and it won't last. It won't be stable. But if somehow, and there are claims that some of these things are being dealt with, if on examination it looks as though it's Steve Baker was saying it dealt with the democratic deficit. I don't know what he means by that.
Sounds good, though.
It sounds good. Maybe he doesn't understand the democratic deficit the way I understand it. We may have two different views on that. But I have an open but suspicious mind.
Open, suspicious mind. What about you?
Open but hopeful, Michelle, that it's been...
Open but hopeful.
Yeah, that it's been a day of compromise on both sides. I think the European Union...
Can't compromise on democracy.
If I may, my Lord, just get one sentence out before you chip in.
Fence.
You're not in the House of Lords now. And I'm hopeful that the European Commission has... I'm not hopeful. I'm very pleased they show signs of compromise in how they've acted. And I think Rishi Sunak, fair play to him. I think he's done his best. And I may say, Steve Baker MP, since he's entered government, has become much more reasonable and easy to listen to. So fingers crossed that we've got compromise.
What does that mean when you say it's become reasonable and easy to listen to? Do you mean you agree with what he's saying?
Yeah, he's less rigid and more flexible and more... The way he's talked about the nationalist community and the Irish has really sort of brought people together in a way that I didn't see him do before he became a minister in the government.
And what was you going to interrupt him and say? Was it going to be interesting and good?
No.
Oh, OK, we'll move on from that then. Earlier on, well, not earlier on, 2 seconds ago, it feels like a lifetime ago when you do this show, I can tell you, Kevin was saying compromise has been reached. Yes, it perhaps has been. Yeah. But why has it taken so long then? I mean, this has been wrangling and toing and froing for goodness knows how long. It feels like a lifetime. Why couldn't this progress, so-called, have been made months and months ago?
Because the European Union quite clearly feel that they want to give a reward to Sunak for some reason, but they didn't want to deal with Truss. Well, they didn't have much opportunity, to be fair, before she was kicked out. And they didn't want to deal with Boris because they've never forgiven Boris for Brexit. And so they've held this over our heads the whole time, cruelly punishing the people of Northern Ireland. And they have, moreover, you know, despite their own international law commitments about letting the UK join the Horizon University programme, they've blocked that, even though they've signed up to it. They've blocked that. They're now saying they'll unblock it because they're pleased with us and they're patting us on the head. And that's really what it was all about. Now, with Sunak, they feel they can deal with him.
Why did you give a loud exhale then, Kevin?
I gave a loud exhale, Michelle, because sometimes the way that Daniel and others characterise the motivations of the European Union here, I think, to his credit, Rishi Sunak has been prepared to get into the detail and try and move this agreement forward in a way that, let's talk about the person who was there long enough, Boris didn't. And I think, I don't think the European Union is that they know Brexit's done. It was about what Rishi Sunak's done. He's recognised that the unionist community had real reservations, and he's tried to meet those reservations.
But you talk about the intentions of the EU. With a serious face, can you honestly say that the EU had good, proper intentions to enable Brexit to be as seamless and as frictionless as possible?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So you don't think there's any truth in perhaps the notion that actually what they needed to do and wanted to do and actually did do was make it as difficult, as drawn out and as complex as possible in order to dissuade anyone else that potentially was considering making a similar manoeuvre?
I don't think the EU is that powerful. I think there are strong bodies of opinion, which I personally regret, but there are strong bodies of opinion in Europe, in countries where they want their own nation state to leave the European Union, and they will not win that debate, the European Union, by trying to strong-arm people. You have to win it on the merits of the argument, something that the Remainers in this country, we failed to win the argument.
And of course, let's not forget, by the way, Keir Starmer has said that Labour will vote in favour of this deal when it comes to that position. Do you think that was the right move?
I do. I was at Keir's speech this morning, and he was very clear that he'll support the efforts of Rishi Sunak. You know, he thinks he has a good idea of what the detail is, because he recognises that this resolution today is trying to respect all the communities and traditions in Northern Ireland.
He hadn't actually seen the deal before he signed up to it. But no, that's all right. It come from the European Union. They were happy with it. So Keir felt he could give it his approval without actually even seeing the detail.
That's a slightly mischievous
I think it's a very fair way of characterising what you've just said.
He actually also knows Northern Ireland very, very well, having been there for many years when he was working as the director of the DPP.
He spent a lot of years in Northern Ireland. He was... all right, go on.
Let's talk about our king. Meeting the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. It's divided opinion. Just to give you a couple of contexts here. One of my viewers, Guy, says, come on, this is just good hosting, good manners and friendship, all of which are British values. Andrew says, King Charles meeting Ursula after a so-called Windsor framework has been agreed without consultation is outrageous. The king has crossed the Rubicon now. What says you, Daniel?
Well, the king acts on the advice of his ministers, so I'm not going to criticise the king in any respect at all. But I do entirely understand why people are so cross. I'm quite cross. Of course, in the right circumstances, the king should meet Mrs von der Leyen because she's an important figurehead and functionary of the European Union. She's not the head of state. The equivalent of the head of state is actually Charles Michel, but she likes to push herself forward and have be in the armchair where the head of state sits, and she should be met. That's OK. She likes the photo op. But for number 10 to sort of use the king as if he was a sort of mascot to try and bums rush people into approving what is still a controversial deal is, I think, low, very low. I can't think of any other Prime Minister who would have done that. And I think number 10 will come to regret the fact there's a bit of a backlash about this. And I don't blame the king at all. He acts on the advice of his ministers.
Kevin?
I think the viewer or listener that said it just there, Michelle, that you quoted, was absolutely right.
Which one?
The one who said it's entirely normal in the finest British traditions, to lay out the red carpet and welcome someone of her stature. I worry, Michelle, that some of the noise and outrage felt by those today is because they are unnecessarily concerned that the King's presence anywhere near these discussions is going to influence the outcome, which it won't. We welcomed an important visitor from the European Union to our country, and I would ask folks to calm down a bit.
Are you riled up about that? Kevin says you need to calm down a little bit if you are, but do you care about this? I mean, there has been a lot of conversation and criticism and speculation as well about this meeting with the King. Where do you stand on it? Do you even care? Give me your thoughts. Let's have a look. Prince Charles is not a politician. He's our head of state. Yes, you're right, William. But he has a key diplomatic role to play, and as such, it is perfectly proper and indeed desirable that he should be having and holding this meeting. Yeah, but what about the timing of it, though? I guess that's what's making many people slightly suspicious. Ian says, if Rishi's great new agreement contains a clause giving ultimate power to the European courts, the Northern Irish and the ERG will promptly christen it the Great Windsor Sellout. Lee says, the very fact the ECJ has the whip hand means that Ireland has been sold out by Sunak. Now, this one, I think this kind of, what they're calling it, the Stormont break, who's got the ultimate say-so, the ultimate kind of top hand, if you like. This will be a detail that many people are interested to get across, isn't it?
Well, I think it's Stormont. I haven't read the detail, but I'm just going to speculate. I might be totally out of line. I'll speculate. In order to act when the Assembly is up and the Executive is up, which they aren't at the moment, they have to act jointly. The two main parties, which are at the moment Sinn Féin and the DUP, they have to act jointly. So if the break can only be exercised by the two of them acting jointly, then it's completely bogus. Bear in mind that the protocol was introduced to Northern Ireland without having a break, and that even when you come to the 4-year vote that the Assembly is allowed to have 4 years down the road, it won't be on a bi-communal basis. It will be a majority vote in the Assembly. So then to go back to a bi-communal basis in order to exercise the break, if that's the case, and I don't know, I've no idea, find out as I read it tonight, a long night reading in bed. If that's the case...
What a riveting life you lead,
I know. If that's the case, then I think it's really being oversold.
Your thoughts on that?
I did think earlier today when I heard the highlights, the early highlights of the agreement, that there was an issue about this bi-communal agreement and the fact that in reality, given the politics in Northern Ireland, that is very difficult to achieve in the theoretical circumstances for which it's designed to be useful. But like Daniel, I haven't read it all, and I just hope, I hope as a concerned citizen that the DUP find enough in this to go forward with it. But I mean, that's why the next 24 hours are crucial.
Yeah, and I think early indications on many different sides do seem to be positive. Rishi Sunak, by the way, I think he will be addressing Parliament imminently. I think, I don't know, apparently about 6:30. Whether or not these things run to time, we shall see. But if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I am desperate to hear Rishi Sunak do that address, worry not, because when he gets up, we will be cutting to him. But with that in mind, I will go to a quick break now, because I want to try and squeeze some other stories in if we are indeed going to be rudely interrupted by our Prime Minister. After the break, I want to ask you this. Benefits. Do you think essentially we should have something similar to the triple lock, meaning that all of the benefits will rise essentially with inflation, meaning that everyone can afford the everyday essentials that they need? Is that a good idea? Or is it all just a little bit universal basic income by the back door under a different name? Give me your thoughts and I'll see you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewbs, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs and Co. With me, Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Daniel Moylan is alongside me, the Tory peer in the House of Lords, and Kevin Craig is a former Labour councillor and CEO of the communications company PLMR. I say I'm keeping you company. Lisa from Watford says I won't be keeping her company anymore. She says Michelle has lost the plot. That's not the first time it's been said about me, I'll be honest, Lisa. But she says Michelle has just sat there and said that James Bond needs to be a black transgender female. This makes you guys the same as every other news station, and I am switching off. I was joking, Lisa, I was joking. Goodness gracious me, the day that we can't make jokes will be a very sad day, especially on Dewbs and Co. with my hilarious panel as well.
Right.
We need to have fun, don't we? We need to be cheery in these strange times that we live in, that's what I say. Anyway, let's move on, talk about benefits, shall we? Are you on universal credit? Are you on any benefit at all, actually? This conversation now that you might not be getting enough money, you might not be able to afford the essentials. This is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. They've been in partnership with Trussell Trust. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Trussell Trust. What they want now is to have so-called essentials guarantee, which would be along the lines of a triple lock, basically, which means that your benefits would rise to make sure that everyone in this country can afford the basics. Kevin Craig, what do you think today?
Well, I'm very interested in this idea, Michelle, and the key fact here is that universal credit is now its lowest ever level as a proportion of average earnings, and why shouldn't it go up over time? And the bigger picture point I'd throw into this discussion as a result of the Joseph Rowntree report is, you know, I don't think anyone wants to be on benefits, really. It's not a great life. But they do, I mean, you talk about in your much watched ads for this channel, I heard it earlier today, how times are hard, the cost of living for people is really difficult. And this report, in a way, is a response to that. And I think it's a very interesting suggestion.
Do you agree? Is it an interesting suggestion?
Well, it's sort of in various forms been around for the last 25 years as people on the left have tried to put this idea of a universal basic income out there. And this is a step in that direction. It's intended to be a step in that direction. There's no hiding it. If you did that, you would fundamentally change the relationship between people and the state. You would increase dependency massively. You would also change fundamentally the relationship between people and work. We already have a huge number of people in their 50s who dropped out of work during COVID and still haven't come back. Now, what are they living on? I'm not saying they're living on benefits, but I'm not claiming that. But they're probably living on bits of savings and bits of odd jobs and things like that here, and they find it fine. But actually, while I respect their right to make their own choices about how they work, the fact is the country as a whole would be better off if these people were back in the workforce and really adding to prosperity, not just scraping along. Now, that's what I think you're going to do. You're going to end up with a society full of people who find it better to scrape along. I know nobody likes that, but a lot of people will be happy with it. Do you know, there are days when I'd be happy with it, Kevin, and probably you too. We'll have a few weeks just scraping along, not earning any money, not getting out of bed in the morning, and we'd all like it. But actually, life is tough and work is important. We need to get out there and do it.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, by the way, that I think about 40% of people that get universal credit, they do actually work.
Absolutely.
So it's not
yes,
this clear
it is a working benefit.
Yeah, you're either a dolly and a scrounger and you're on benefits, or you're a grafter.
But if you had a universal basic income where people had enough money from the state to scrape by, more or less, without working, which is what this is a step towards, that would fundamentally change the basis of the relationship with the state.
I want to say two things, may I, Michelle, to that, is that Daniel, again, he threw in a little swipe earlier on that, this is all about people from the left. Well, these proposals actually they've polled it, there's support amongst Conservative voters for universal credit to have a form of triple lock on it to rise as time goes on. And that's because, as you very rightly point out, Michelle, it is, for many people, it's a benefit in addition to their working income. It's not a universal credit.
Point two is going to have to pause because Rishi Sunak is speaking in the comments.
She was a remarkable woman who commanded huge admiration and respect as the first female Speaker of this House. She was as firm as she was fair, and she presided over many historic moments in this House, among them the debates on the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Her passion, wit and immeasurable contribution to our democracy will never be forgotten. And Mr. Speaker, let us also send our very best wishes to Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell and his family. He is a man of immense courage who both on and off duty has devoted himself to the service of others. This House stands united with the people and leaders of all communities across Northern Ireland in condemning those who are trying to drag us back to the past. They will never succeed. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the Northern Ireland Protocol. After weeks of negotiations today, we have made a decisive breakthrough. The Windsor Framework delivers free-flowing trade within the whole United Kingdom. It protects Northern Ireland's place in our union, and it safeguards sovereignty for the people of Northern Ireland. By achieving all this, it preserves the delicate balance inherent in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And, Mr. Speaker, it does what many said could not be done, removing thousands of pages of EU laws and making permanent, legally binding changes to the Protocol Treaty itself. That is the breakthrough we have made. Those are the changes we will deliver, and now is the time to move forward as one United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, before I turn to the details, let us remind ourselves why this matters. It matters because at the heart of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and the reason it's endured for a quarter of a century, is equal respect for the aspirations and identities of all communities and all its three strands. But the Northern Ireland Protocol has undermined that balance. How can we say the protocol protects the Belfast Good Friday Agreement when it has caused the institutions of that agreement to collapse? So, in line with our legal responsibilities, we are acting today to preserve the balance of that agreement and chart a new way forward for Northern Ireland. I pay tribute to our European friends for recognising the need for change, particularly President von der Leyen, my predecessors for laying the groundwork for today's agreement, and and my right honourable friends, the Foreign and Northern Ireland Secretaries, for their perseverance in finally persuading the EU to do what it spent years refusing to do, to rewrite the treaty and replace it with a radical, legally binding new framework. Today's agreement has three equally important objectives. First, allowing trade to flow freely within our UK internal market. Second, protecting Northern Ireland's place in our union. And third, safeguarding sovereignty and closing the democratic deficit. Let me take each in turn. Mr. Speaker, core to the problems with the protocol was that it treated goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland as if they were crossing an international customs border. This created extra costs and paperwork for businesses who had to fill out complex customs declarations. It limited choice for the people of Northern Ireland, and it undermined the UK internal market, a matter of identity as well as economics. Today's agreement removes any sense of a border in the Irish Sea and ensures the free flow of trade within the UK. We have secured a key negotiating objective: the introduction of a new green lane for goods destined for Northern Ireland, with a separate red lane for those going to the EU. Within the green lane, burdensome customs bureaucracy will be scrapped and replaced with data sharing of ordinary existing commercial information. Routine checks and tests will also be scrapped. The only checks will be those required to stop smugglers and criminals. And our new green lane will be open to a broad, comprehensive range of businesses across the United Kingdom. I'm pleased to say we have also permanently protected tariff-free movement of all types of steel into Northern Ireland. And for goods going the other way, from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, we have scrapped export declarations, delivering finally completely unfettered trade. And Mr. Speaker, the commitment to establish the green lane is achieved by a legally binding amendment to the text of the treaty itself. This is fundamental, far-reaching change, and it permanently removes the border in the Irish Sea. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the single most important area of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is food. 3/4 of the food in Northern Ireland's supermarkets comes from the rest of the UK. Yet the protocol applied the same burdens on shipments from Cairnryan to Larne as between Holyhead and Dublin. If it was implemented in full, we would see supermarket lorries needing hundreds of certificates for every individual item, every single document checked, supermarket staples like sausages banned altogether, more delays, more cost, less choice. So today's agreement fixes all this with a new, permanent, legally abiding approach to food. We will expand the green lane to food retailers, and not just supermarkets, but wholesalers and hospitality too. Instead of hundreds of certificates, lorries will make one simple digital declaration to confirm that goods will remain in Northern Ireland. Visual inspections will be cut from 100% now to just 5%. Physical checks and tests will be scrapped unless we suspect fraud, smuggling or disease. And so there will be no need for vets in warehouses. Of course, to deliver this, we need to reassure the EU that food imports won't be taken into Ireland. So we will ask retailers to mark a small number of particularly high-risk food products as not for EU, with a phased rollout of this requirement to give them the time to adjust. And more fundamentally, we have delivered a form of dual regulation for food, the single biggest sector by far for East-West trade and one of the most important in people's lives. Under the protocol, retail food products made to UK standards could not be sold in Northern Ireland. Today's agreement completely changes that. This means the ban on British products like sausages entering Northern Ireland has now been scrapped. If it's available on supermarket shelves in Great Britain, then it will be available in supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland. We will still need to make sure that goods moved into Northern Ireland don't risk bringing in animal and plant diseases, but that's clearly a common sense measure, never opposed by anyone, to prevent diseases circulating within the long-standing single epidemiological zone on the island of Ireland. And, Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the treatment of parcels. If the protocol was fully implemented, every single parcel travelling between Great Britain and Northern Ireland will be subject to full international customs. You'd have needed a long, complex form to send every single parcel, even a birthday present, for a niece or nephew. And you could have only shopped online from retailers willing to deal with all that bureaucracy, with some already pulling out of Northern Ireland. Today's agreement fixes all of this. It achieves something we've never achieved before, removing requirements of the EU Customs Code for people sending and receiving parcels. Families can rightly send packages to each other without filling in forms. Online retailers can serve customers in Northern Ireland as they did before, and businesses can ship parcels through the Green Lane, all underpinned by data sharing by parcel operators with a phased rollout and time for them to adjust. So, Mr. Speaker, no burdensome customs bureaucracy, no routine checks, bans on food products scrapped, steel tariff rate quotas fixed, tariff reimbursement scheme approved, vet inspections gone, export declarations gone, parcels paperwork gone. We have delivered what the people of Northern Ireland asked for and the command paper promised. We have removed the border in the Irish Sea. But Mr. Speaker, to preserve the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, we also need to protect Northern Ireland's place in our union. The Windsor Framework is about making sure that Northern Ireland gets the full benefit of being part of the United Kingdom in every respect. Under the protocol, in too many ways, that simply wasn't the case. Take tax. When I was Chancellor, it frustrated me that when I cut VAT on solar panels or beer duty in pubs, those tax cuts didn't apply in Northern Ireland. Now we've amended the legal text of the treaty so that critical VAT and excise changes will apply to the whole of the United Kingdom. This means zero rates of VAT on energy-saving materials will now apply in Northern Ireland. Reforms to alcohol duty to cut the cost of a pint in pubs will now apply in Northern Ireland. But because we now have control over VAT policy, we can make sure that the EU's plan to reduce the VAT threshold by £10,000 will not apply in Northern Ireland, and nor will the SME VAT directive that would have brought huge amounts of EU red tape for small businesses. We're also making subsidy control provisions work as intended. Already, just 2% of subsidy measures in Northern Ireland fall within the scope of the EU approvals under the protocol. Nevertheless, today's agreement goes further, addressing the so-called reach-back of EU state aid law. It does this by imposing stringent new tests. For the EU to argue we're in breach of their rules, they'd now have to demonstrate that there is a real, genuine and material impact on Northern Ireland's trade with the EU. That is a much higher threshold than the protocol, limiting disputes to what the 2021 command paper called subsidies on a significant scale relating directly to Northern Ireland. We've also protected the special status of agriculture and fisheries subsidies in Northern Ireland, which will be completely outside the EU's common agricultural policy. All of which means the problem of reach-back is fixed. As well as tax and spend, the UK government has a responsibility to protect the supply of medicines to all its citizens. Our ability to do that was constrained by the protocol. The biggest problem is that drugs approved for use by the UK's medicines regulator are not automatically available in Northern Ireland. Imagine someone suffering with cancer in Belfast, seeing a potentially life-changing new drug available everywhere else in the UK, but unable to access it at home. And when the current grace period ends in 2024, the situation will get worse still. Expensive and burdensome checks on all medicines, Companies having to manufacture drugs with 2 completely different labels and supply chains. Pharmacies needing to check every package with complex scanners. And when 80% of Northern Ireland's medicines come from Great Britain, those frictions pose a serious risk to the supply of medicines to the people of Northern Ireland. To fix this, today's agreement achieves something unprecedented. It provides dual regulation for medicines. The UK's regulator will approve all drugs for the whole UK market, including Northern Ireland, with no role for the European Medicines Agency. This fully protects the supply of medicines from Great Britain into Northern Ireland and once again asserts the primacy of UK regulation. The same medicines, in the same packs, with the same labels, will be available in every pharmacy and hospital in the United Kingdom. And crucially, dual regulation means that Northern Ireland's world-leading healthcare industry, which brings much-needed jobs and investment, can still trade with both the EU and UK markets. This is a landmark deal for patients in Northern Ireland. It is a permanent solution that brings peace of mind. And Mr. Speaker, the protocol also banned quintessentially British products going to Northern Ireland. When people wanted to import oak trees to mark Her late Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, the protocol stood in their way. It suspended the historic trade in seed potatoes between Scotland and Northern Ireland. And if implemented, it would create massive costs and bureaucracies for people travelling around the UK with their pets, disrupting family life and our family of nations. That's why today's agreement will lift the ban on shrubs, plants and trees going to Northern Ireland. Lift the ban on the movement of seed potatoes, particularly important for Scottish businesses. And we will deliver this by expanding the existing UK plant passport scheme. And when it comes to pets, we have made sure that people from Northern Ireland will have completely free access to travel to Great Britain. And if you're a pet owner travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, just make sure your pet is microchipped, and then all you'll need to do is simply tick a box when booking your travel. So whether it's lower VAT rates, lower beer duty, Jubilee Oaks in garden centres, seamless travel with pets, seamless trade in seed potatoes, or the seamless supply of cutting-edge medicines, all of this now available for everyone, everywhere in the United Kingdom. And Mr. Speaker, the Windsor Framework goes further still, safeguarding sovereignty for the people of Northern Ireland and eliminating the democratic deficit. Fundamentally, the protocol meant the EU could impose new laws on the people of Northern Ireland without them having a say. I know some members of this House, whose voices I deeply respect, say that EU laws should have no role whatsoever in Northern Ireland. I understand that view. I am sympathetic to it. But for as long as the people of Northern Ireland continue to support their businesses having privileged access to the EU market, and if we want to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, as we all do, then there will be some role for EU law. So the question is, what is the absolute minimum amount necessary to avoid a hard border? Today's agreement scraps 1,700 pages of EU law. The amount of EU law that applies in Northern Ireland is less than 3%. And the people of Northern Ireland retain the right to reject that 3% through next year's consent vote. However, that consent vote is about the whole protocol, so it cannot by its nature provide oversight of individual new laws. And it does not address the number one challenge to sovereignty made by the protocol, the ability of the EU to impose new or amended goods laws on Northern Ireland without them having a say. To address that, today's agreement introduces a new Stormont break. The Stormont break does more than just give Northern Ireland a say over new EU laws. It means they can block them. How will this work? The democratically elected Assembly can oppose new EU goods rules that would have significant and lasting effects on their everyday lives. They will do so on the same basis as the petition of concern mechanism in the Good Friday Agreement, needing the support of 30 members from at least 2 parties. If that happens, the UK government will have a veto. And we will work with the Northern Ireland Assembly and all parties to codify how the UK government will use that veto. And let me tell the House the full significance of this breakthrough. The Stormont break gives the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement a powerful new safeguard. It means the United Kingdom can veto new EU laws if they are not supported by both communities in Northern Ireland. And yes, it is true that until now, the EU had refused to consider treaty change. We were told it was impossible. The EU negotiators would never consider it. But the Stormont break has been introduced by fundamentally rewriting the treaty, specifically the provisions relating to dynamic alignment. That is a permanent change. It ends the automatic ratchet of EU law. And if the veto is used, the European courts can never overturn our decision. And the EU have also explicitly accepted an important principle in the political declaration. It is there in black and white that the treaty is subject to the Vienna Convention. This means that unequivocally the legal basis for the Windsor Framework is in international law. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Stone, for his support in negotiating this point. And it puts beyond all doubt that we have now taken back control. Mr. Speaker, from the very start, we have listened closely and carefully to views on all sides of this debate. I'm grateful to many members of this House, the communities of Northern Ireland, and the voices of business and civil society for putting forward their suggestions. I want to particularly thank the Northern Ireland business groups that I have spoken to. I hope in today's agreement they recognise we have addressed their concerns. We are delivering stability, certainty, simplicity, affordability and clarity, as well as strengthened representation for the businesses of Northern Ireland. I also want to speak directly to the unionist community. I understand and have listened to your frustrations and concerns. And I would not be standing here today if I did not believe today's agreement marks a turning point for the people of Northern Ireland. It is clearly in the interests of the people and those of us who are passionate about the cause of unionism for power sharing to return. Of course, parties will want to consider the agreement in detail, a process that will need time and care. And there are, of course, many voices and perspectives within Northern Ireland, and it is a job of government to respect them all. But I have kept the concerns raised by the elected representatives of unionism at the forefront of my mind, because it is their concerns with the protocol that have been so pronounced. And what I can say is this: our goal has been to ensure the economic rights of the people of Northern Ireland under the Act of Union and Belfast Good Friday Agreement, placing them on an equal footing with the rest of the UK with respect to tax, trade and the availability of goods. And we have worked to end the prospect of trade diversion, removed any sense of a border for UK internal trade, removed routine customs or checks for goods destined for Northern Ireland, removed thousands of pages of existing EU law and introduced a UK veto on dynamic alignment through the Stormont break. We have created a form of dual regulation where it works and it is needed most in sectors like medicines and food retail. We have delivered unfettered access to the whole UK market for Northern Ireland's businesses, and we will take further steps to avoid regulatory divergence in future. We've secured a clear EU commitment and process to manage future changes with a special goods body, and all of this means Northern Ireland's businesses have continued access to the EU market as they requested. It means we have protected the letter and the spirit of Northern Ireland's constitutional guarantee in the Belfast Agreement, with the Stormont break creating an effective cross-community safeguard. There are, Mr. Speaker, two distinct economies on the island of Ireland, and that will remain the case. Today's agreement puts beyond all doubt that Northern Ireland's place in the internal market and United Kingdom is fully restored. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by directly addressing the question of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. As I and my predecessors always said, the bill was only ever meant to be a last resort, meant for a world where we could not get negotiations going. As the government said at the time of introduction, our clear preference remains a negotiated solution. Now that we've persuaded the EU to fundamentally rewrite the treaty text of the protocol, we have a new and better option. The Windsor Framework delivers a decisively better outcome than the bill, achieving what people said could not be done and what the bill does not offer. It permanently removes any sense of a border in the Irish Sea. It gives us control over dynamic alignment through the Stormont break beyond what the bill promised, and the bill did not change a thing in international law, keeping the jurisdiction of the ECJ and leaving us open to months, maybe years of uncertainty, disruption and legal challenge. Today's agreement makes binding legal changes to the treaty itself and is explicitly based in international law. And unlike the bill, it is an agreement that provides certainty, stability and, crucially, can start delivering benefits almost immediately for the people and businesses of Northern Ireland. Of course, the House would expect to be informed of the government's updated legal position on whether there is a lawful basis to proceed with the bill, so I'm publishing it today. It says that because we have achieved a new negotiated agreement which preserves the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the original and sound justification legally for the bill has now fallen away.
Well, there you go. That is a man very pleased with himself. Our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, addressing the House there, talking about his new so-called Windsor Framework. Trees and sausages, red lines and green lines. Apparently, this is a breakthrough. Kevin, your thoughts?
Very simply, Michelle, 64% of voters in Northern Ireland want their local politicians to start governing again. They want them to get on with it, whatever the protocol says. Rishi just got laughed at when he praised Boris Johnson in the House. It's now for the DUP. Can they agree that everyone's compromised? It's now with them and right-wing Conservatives, and if they don't get this legislation through, Labour will get it through with Rishi.
You'll push it over the line. Who would have thought you'd have heard yourself saying that sentence there? You'd be Labour working with the Tories to get it over. Daniel Moylan, your thoughts?
I still have to be satisfied that the people of Northern Ireland aren't going to be living under foreign laws made by, in a way that they have no say over. And from what he's saying, this Stormont break does look to me as though it's going to be very rarely used because it's going to be require a level of consent which is unlikely to be achieved.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your thoughts in the inbox right now. Many of you still on the fence. I sense such a huge amount of enthusiasm and positivity there from Sunak, but that is not coming through, I have to say, from you guys at home. I heard you, by the way, Kevin Craig, you almost sniggered a little bit when British sausages being on the shelves in Northern Ireland were mentioned. Why?
I don't think the concept of British sausages on the shelves are funny. It's just that we are listening to Rishi having to go into the detail of these micro things because I don't believe that Boris Johnson paid enough attention to the detail.
Everyone knew about sausages. The sausages are there emblematically.
He doesn't read his papers.
Not to do with... He does.
Your old boss.
I used to work with him.
Yeah.
Well,
OK, so anyway, Michelle,
you had his back.
He does read his papers.
He reads his papers. There you go. Well, he's still talking. Let's cut back to him and have a little listen in.
Right for our United Kingdom, and I commend it to this House.
Thank you. What I want to do is make sure we get everybody in. This is a very important day. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for the briefing I was given earlier this afternoon. I'd like to start by joining the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Betty Boothroyd. As Speaker of this House, She was at the forefront of a generation that smashed the glass ceiling for female politicians. She was an inspirational woman, a dedicated and devoted public servant who will be clearly missed by all who knew her. My thoughts, the thoughts of the whole House, are with her very many friends and family. Mr. Speaker, the Good Friday Agreement and the peace and prosperity it brought to Northern Ireland are amongst the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. But we in Labour have always recognised this achievement does not principally belong to us, but to the people of Northern Ireland, who over a quarter of a century have overcome differences that once seemed insurmountable and shown that they can work together to build a better future for themselves and for the generations to come. I had the privilege of working for a number of years with the Police Service of Northern Ireland so that it can serve and represent both communities. But it's the police officers themselves who carried out that change. They helped make peace of the Good Friday Agreement stick. So I was deeply saddened by the shooting of DCI John Caldwell. And our thoughts, the thoughts of the whole House, are with him, his family, and with his colleagues. But, Mr. Speaker, DCI Caldwell's shooting is a reminder that we must continue to strive for peace, that we in the House must take our obligations under the Good Friday Agreement and to the people of Northern Ireland as seriously as they do. It is in that spirit that I have been clear for some time that if the Prime Minister were to get an agreement with the EU, and if their agreement is in the interests of this country and Northern Ireland, then Labour would support it. And we will stick to our word. We will not snipe. We will not seek to play political games. And when the Prime Minister puts this deal forward for a vote, Labour will support it and vote for it. The protocol will never be perfect. It's a compromise. But I've always been clear that if implemented correctly, it is an agreement that can work in the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. And now that it has been agreed, we all have an obligation to make it work. The moral core of the Good Friday Agreement is simple. All people of Northern Ireland have the right to identify themselves and be accepted as Irish or British or both.